Your name interrupted me today. I wasn't looking through old messages. I wasn't feeling nostalgic, and I wasn't trying to bring the past back to life. I was in the middle of an ordinary moment when everything inside me became unexpectedly still, and there you were. Not your face at first. A feeling. The unmistakable sense that somewhere behind the life you show everyone, you have been carrying something quietly. I almost dismissed it. People come to mind for countless reasons: memory, coincidence, a familiar song, an unnoticed reminder. I don't use God's name to decorate every emotion I cannot explain. But this felt different. It wasn't simply that I thought about you. It was what I suddenly understood about you. You have been asking for a sign, but not in the way people usually imagine. You have not been standing beneath the sky demanding a miracle. You have been moving through your days normally, doing what needs to be done, while privately wondering whether God still sees the part of you that has grown tired. And I think you needed someone to notice that without making you prove it. So I need to tell you this carefully. God put you on my heart today. I don't yet believe it was because you needed advice. You have heard enough advice. You know how to make responsible decisions, survive difficult seasons, and continue when your emotions cannot keep pace with your obligations. This felt more like a reminder that your silence has not made you invisible. Something about your journey stood out to me. You have become quieter about what hurts because explaining it began to feel more exhausting than carrying it alone. There was a time when you tried to put your feelings into words. You attempted to tell someone why the distance affected you, why a certain betrayal changed you, or why you could not simply move on as quickly as they expected. But they listened only long enough to prepare a response. Maybe they minimized it. Perhaps they offered a solution when what you needed was understanding. Or they became uncomfortable with your honesty, so you softened the truth until it no longer resembled what you were living. After enough moments like that, silence started feeling safer, not peaceful. Safer. There is a difference. Peace allows you to rest. Silence sometimes requires you to keep holding your breath. I think you felt this too. You can be surrounded by people who know your schedule, your habits, and the sound of your laugh, yet still feel that no one knows where your mind goes when the room becomes quiet. They know what you do. They do not always know what it costs you to keep doing it. They see that you answer, arrive, help, remember, and endure. Because you remain functional, they assume you are fine. Your competence has hidden your exhaustion so successfully that even you sometimes question whether you are allowed to call it pain. You tell yourself that other people have suffered more. You remind yourself of everything you should be grateful for. You try to correct sadness with perspective. Gratitude matters, but it does not cancel grief. You can appreciate what remains and still mourn what changed. You can trust God and still admit that you do not understand what He is doing. Faith is not the absence of questions. Sometimes faith is the decision to remain honest while the answers are still silent. And I think the silence has been difficult for you lately. You prayed about something with more sincerity than you admitted to anyone. It may have involved a person, a decision, a door you hoped would open, or a part of your life that seemed finally ready to change. For a while, you noticed little signs that encouraged you. A conversation happened at the right moment. An opportunity appeared. Someone entered your life and awakened a feeling you thought had gone quiet. You wondered whether this was the answer. Then something shifted. The door did not open completely. The person became uncertain. The opportunity stalled. What had felt meaningful became confusing, leaving you with an uncomfortable question. Why would God allow something to feel so significant if it was not meant to remain? That may be the mystery beneath your exhaustion. You are not only grieving what happened, you are struggling with what you thought it meant. Loss is painful, but uncertain meaning creates a different ache. If something was clearly wrong, you could reject it. If it was clearly right, you could trust it. But when it contains beauty and disappointment at the same time, your heart does not know where to place it. So you keep revisiting the details. You remember the timing. You remember what you prayed before it appeared. You remember how unexpectedly natural it felt. Part of you still wonders whether you gave up too quickly. Another part wonders whether you held on too long. Between those two fears, you have been asking God for clarity while quietly worrying that you may have missed it. I don't think you've noticed this yet. You are more afraid of misunderstanding God than you are of losing the thing itself. You could survive another disappointment. You have survived them before. What frightens you is the possibility that you called something meaningful when it was merely temporary, or walked away from something sacred because it became difficult. That fear reveals something important about you. You do not want only what feels good, you want what is true. You would rather endure an honest ending than build your future around a beautiful illusion. But truth becomes difficult to recognize when desire, fear, memory, and faith are all speaking at once. Desire says, I still want this. Fear says, do something before it disappears. Memory says, remember how real it felt. Faith says something quieter. You do not have to force what God is asking you to trust. That quiet voice is easily drowned out because forcing something creates the feeling of control. Trust does not. Trust sometimes looks like standing still when every anxious part of you wants to run toward an answer. It means allowing another person's actions to reveal their intentions without repeatedly translating those actions into the outcome you hope for. It means accepting that not every closed door is rejection, and not every open door is permission. Some doors open only long enough to show you what has been hidden inside you. Perhaps someone's arrival revealed that you could still feel deeply. Perhaps their absence exposed how often you confuse waiting with loyalty. Perhaps the disappointment uncovered a wound you had learned to manage, but never truly allowed to heal. That does not make the experience meaningless. It may mean its purpose was different from the one you assigned to it. Years ago, I heard about a woman who prayed every morning beside a small kitchen window. She had planted a tree outside it with her husband, and after he died, that tree became sacred to her. It was the last living thing they had placed into the earth together. One winter, a storm split the tree. She stood at the window the next morning, looking at its broken trunk, unable to understand why God would take one more thing that connected her to the person she had already lost. A neighbor helped her remove the fallen branches. Beneath them, they discovered something she had never noticed. The tree had been blocking sunlight from a narrow strip of ground along the house. Months later, flowers began growing there. She did not celebrate the tree's destruction. The flowers did not replace it, and their beauty did not make her grief unnecessary. But they revealed that loss and new life had occupied the same ground. The storm had not been sent to punish her. The flowers had been waiting for light. I thought of that story when you came to mind today. Not because I believe every painful event conceals an immediate blessing. Some losses remain losses. We do not have to rename pain to prove we have faith. But I wonder whether something in your life has been blocking light without meaning to. Perhaps a hope became so large that every other possibility grew in its shadow. Perhaps you have been looking at one closed door so intensely that you no longer notice how much of your identity is waiting outside it. Or perhaps the thing blocking the light is not a person at all. Perhaps it is the belief that you should have figured everything out by now. You thought you would be further along, more settled, less affected by old wounds. You expected time to make certain questions irrelevant, yet something small can still return you to a place you believed you had outgrown. That frustrates you. You interpret emotional recurrence as failure. But healing rarely moves in a straight line. Sometimes you revisit an old pain because you are finally strong enough to understand it differently. The memory returns, but you are not the same person receiving it. You possess language you did not have then. You recognize patterns you once called destiny. You can now see that some of what you blamed on your worth was actually another person's limitation. The pain feels familiar, but your awareness is new. That is not moving backward. It is meeting the past with more truth than you could carry before. I see this in you. You are standing closer to a change than your emotions allow you to believe. It does not feel like progress because there has been no dramatic breakthrough. You still have questions. You still become tired. Some mornings, your faith feels clear. On others, it feels like a fragile thread you are afraid to pull. But you have begun noticing what disturbs your peace. You no longer call every intense connection love. You no longer automatically assume that someone's distance means you should work harder. You are becoming uncomfortable with relationships in which you must betray your instincts to preserve the bond. That discomfort is not bitterness. It is discernment beginning to awaken. And perhaps that is why you came to my heart today. Not so I could promise that everything you want is about to arrive. I cannot turn uncertainty into prophecy merely because reassurance would feel comforting. I think the message is more honest than that. You have mistaken God's silence for his absence. You have assumed that because the answer has not arrived in the form you expected, nothing is happening. but some of the most important changes are taking place beneath what you can presently see. Your standards are changing. Your identity is becoming less dependent on who stays. Your understanding of love is separating from anxiety. Your faith is growing roots beneath the language of certainty. Roots do not look like progress from above the ground. They deepen in darkness. No one applauds them. Nothing visible confirms that life is forming. Still, they are the reason a future storm will not remove what is meant to stand. You may be in a season of roots. That is why forcing visible results feels so exhausting. You are demanding flowers from a part of your life that is still learning how to remain grounded. I need to tell you something you may have forgotten. Being in an unfinished season does not mean you have been forgotten. You are not late. You are not being punished. You are not less worthy because the answer has taken longer than you hoped. And the fact that you are tired does not mean your faith has failed. It means you have been carrying the question for a long time. So let this message meet you there. Not at the polished version of your faith, but at the honest one. The version that still hopes yet sometimes trembles. The version that wants to trust but also wants to understand. You do not have to hide that version from God. He already knows her. Perhaps that is the first reason you were placed on my heart today. You needed to hear that the part of you struggling to believe is not the part God has rejected. It may be the very part He is drawing closer. Being drawn closer does not always feel like comfort. Sometimes it feels like everything you once leaned on has become uncertain at the same time. The reassurance you used to receive from certain people no longer reaches you. Familiar distractions cannot quiet your thoughts. Even prayer may feel different, as if your words rise into silence and return without an answer. That silence can awaken an older fear, not simply the fear that something will go wrong, but the fear that you will have to face it alone. I realized something recently about the way you carry loneliness. You rarely describe it as loneliness because your life may not look empty. People contact you. Responsibilities fill your hours. Someone may even depend on you every day. Yet there is a kind of loneliness that does not come from having no one around. It comes from having nowhere to place the unedited truth. You have learned to divide your feelings into acceptable portions. You tell one person the practical details, another person the safer, emotional version, and keep the deepest part between yourself and God. Even there, you sometimes censor it. You pray respectfully when you want to cry honestly. You ask for strength when what you really want to ask is, why did you let this matter so much if I was going to lose it? You worry that frustration sounds ungrateful. You fear that disappointment might be mistaken for a lack of faith. So you attempt to bring God a composed version of your heart. But intimacy cannot grow where honesty is continually edited. The prayers that draw you closest may not be the beautiful ones. They may be the unfinished sentences spoken when you no longer know how to sound faithful. They may be the moments when you admit that you are angry, confused, jealous, frightened, or tired of being the person who always has to endure. God is not threatened by the truth of what you feel. You cannot surprise Him with emotions He already watched forming inside you. And perhaps what feels like spiritual distance is not always distance. Sometimes it is the strain of trying to appear peaceful in the one place where you were invited to be completely known. I think you felt this too. You can believe God loves you and still struggle to feel safe with what He allows. Those two experiences can exist together. You know the language of trust. You have heard that everything happens for a reason, that timing is perfect, and that closed doors protect you. But when the closed door had a name, a future, or a prayer attached to it, those sentences did not feel comforting. They felt too small. Your pain was specific. The reassurance was general. You were not questioning whether God had a plan for the world. You were wondering whether His plan had room for the tenderness of your particular heart. Would He remember how much this cost you? Would He understand that you are not asking for perfection, only something stable enough to trust? Would the waiting eventually make sense? Or would you simply have to become someone who stopped asking? That is the deeper loneliness beneath your question. You are afraid that surrender means becoming emotionally numb. But surrender is not pretending you no longer want what you want. It is allowing desire to remain open-handed. It says, "This matters to me, but I will not destroy myself trying to control its final shape." That kind of trust is difficult when your history has taught you that letting go usually means losing. Perhaps people promised to return and did not. Perhaps someone asked for time, then used that time to disappear. Perhaps you once gave space because you wanted to be understanding, only to discover that your patience had made your absence convenient. Experiences like that train the heart to hold tightly. You begin to believe that if you stop checking, initiating, helping, or proving your importance, the connection will fade. So when someone tells you to release control and trust God, your body hears something different. It hears prepare to be abandoned again. This is why faith can become entangled with attachment. You may trust God intellectually while your emotional memory still expects loss. A delayed answer feels like rejection. Silence feels like withdrawal. An uncertain season feels like proof that you have somehow fallen outside his attention. But the fear did not begin with God. It began in human relationships where love felt unpredictable. You carried that expectation into prayer because the heart often imagines divine love through the patterns it first learned from people. If affection was earned, you may treat prayer like performance. If attention was inconsistent, you may search constantly for signs that God is still near. If mistakes led to withdrawal, you may interpret every hardship as punishment. If your needs were called excessive, you may feel guilty for asking God repeatedly. I see this in you. Part of your spiritual exhaustion may come from trying to deserve what was never meant to be earned. You keep reviewing yourself whenever an answer is delayed. Was I not grateful enough? Did I pray incorrectly? Is this happening because I ignored a sign? Am I being taught a lesson because I wanted too much? Self-examination can be wise, but fear turns it into prosecution. It searches your life for a mistake large enough to explain the silence. That gives the uncertainty a cause, but it does not give you peace. Sometimes the answer is delayed without being denied. Sometimes the answer is no without the no being punishment. And sometimes no clear answer appears because you are being invited to make a decision using the wisdom, character, and discernment already growing within you. You may be waiting for a sign because a sign would remove the responsibility of choosing. If the path were marked unmistakably, you would not have to risk regret. But what if clarity is not always a feeling that descends upon you? What if it sometimes emerges after you take the most honest step available? This does not mean acting impulsively. It means recognizing that fear often asks for impossible certainty before allowing any movement. It says you must know how everything ends before deciding how to live today. Faith offers something quieter, enough light for the next truthful step, not the entire road. There is an old story about a traveler who became lost before sunrise. He carried a small lantern, but its light reached only a few feet ahead. Frustrated, he sat beside the road and waited for morning. An elderly woman passed him carrying a lantern of the same size. "How can you keep walking when you can't see where the road ends?" he asked. She smiled and said, "I don't need to see the end. When I reach the edge of the light moves with me." The traveler had mistaken limited visibility for the absence of a path. I thought about that image because you have been asking to see the end of something. You want to know whether the person returns before you release the waiting. You want proof that another opportunity will come before you close the wrong door. You want assurance that choosing peace will not lead to permanent loneliness. Those desires are understandable. But perhaps you are not being given a view of the entire road, because the entire road is not where your life is happening. Your life is happening within the light you have now. And what does that light reveal? Maybe it reveals that you are tired of one-sided effort. Maybe it reveals that someone's words and actions have remained divided for too long. Maybe it reveals that your current way of living is built around fear rather than peace. Or perhaps it reveals that you have been avoiding a beginning because you are still demanding closure from an ending. You may not know everything, but you probably know more than you allow yourself to trust. The difficulty is that your truth may require grief. If you admit that someone cannot give you what you need, you must mourn the possibility you protected. If you acknowledge that a season has ended, you must step into an identity not organized around waiting. If you accept that God's answer may look different from your request, you must release the future you rehearsed privately. Confusion sometimes protects us from grief. As long as you remain uncertain, every possibility stays alive. But a life filled with possibilities can still become a life that never moves. Something about your journey stood out to me. You have not been waiting only for an answer. You have been waiting to feel safe enough to accept it. That is why signs alone have not settled you. You have received moments of clarity before. You felt them in your body, a quiet knowing that something had changed. But shortly afterward, fear began negotiating. It brought back the beautiful memories. It imagined the other person finally changing. It asked whether patience might produce a different outcome. Then you called the return of doubt a loss of clarity. It may not have been. Clarity and grief can occupy the same moment. You can know what is right and still wish it were different. You can recognize that a door must close and still place your hand on it one final time. You can trust God and cry over what trust requires you to release. Tears do not mean you chose incorrectly. Sometimes they mean you stopped lying about the cost. There is another reason you may have come to my heart today. You have been treating emotional pain as evidence that you are moving away from God, when the pain may be revealing where you are finally becoming honest with Him. You are no longer satisfied with borrowed faith, the kind made entirely of other people's explanations. You need something that can survive unanswered prayer, disappointment, ambiguity, and the ordinary days when nothing feels spiritually significant. That kind of faith is less dramatic. It does not depend on constant signs. It becomes the quiet decision to believe you are accompanied even when you do not feel observed. And I know that word, accompanied, may touch something tender in you. You have spent much of your life accompanying others. You stayed with them through confusion. You noticed changes they did not explain. You carried their secrets carefully. You remembered what made them afraid and tried not to press against their wounds. You offered the kind of presence you secretly needed, but not everyone knew how to return it. That imbalance made you wonder whether you were asking for something rare. Perhaps you began believing that being deeply understood was an unrealistic desire. It is not unrealistic, but it cannot be created by making yourself endlessly understandable to people who remain emotionally unavailable. You do not receive true connection by explaining your heart until someone finally agrees to handle it gently. Real care becomes curious without requiring a crisis. It notices. It asks. It remains long enough to hear the honest answer. I think that is partly what this message is doing. It is not solving your life or promising that a particular outcome is approaching. It is meeting the question beneath your questions. Am I still seen while nothing is changing? Yes. Not because these words possess some magical certainty, but because the very ache you tried to hide has led you here, into a moment where it can finally be named. You are tired of performing strength. You are afraid that surrender will resemble abandonment. You are searching for certainty because uncertainty once cost you dearly. You want to trust God, but part of you still expects His love to behave like the inconsistent love you received from people. None of this makes you faithless. It makes you human. And perhaps understanding that is the next small circle of light. You do not have to heal every old fear tonight. You only have to stop calling the fear a prophecy. The fact that someone left does not mean everyone will. The fact that one prayer was answered differently does not mean your prayers are ignored. The fact that you cannot see the road does not mean there is no road. You are not being asked to walk through complete darkness, only to reach the edge of the light you already have, and trust that when you arrive, the light will move with you. The light will move with you, but there is something you must be willing to leave outside it. The identity you built around being the one who waits. That may be difficult to hear because waiting has not felt like an identity. It has felt like a season, something temporary you have been enduring until an answer arrives. But look closely at how much of your life has begun organizing itself around what has not happened. You delay joy because the situation remains unresolved. You hesitate to begin something new because part of you is still emotionally committed to an old possibility. You imagine that peace will come after the message, the apology, the decision, the healing, or the unmistakable sign. Without meaning to, you have placed your real life somewhere in the future. And I need to tell you what came to me when your name entered my thoughts. Perhaps you are not waiting for God to move. Perhaps you are waiting for permission to become someone you already sense you are becoming. That is the hidden tension inside you. One part wants the familiar story to be restored. Another part has quietly outgrown it. You ask God to bring something back, but when you imagine its return exactly as it was, your spirit does not feel entirely peaceful. You feel relief, perhaps, validation, the satisfaction of knowing you were not forgotten. But beneath that relief, a question remains. Would returning to it require you to become smaller again? You may not want the old situation as much as you want it to return differently. You want the person to come back with clarity they did not possess before. You want the opportunity to reopen without the conditions that once exhausted you. You want the relationship restored, but with honesty, consistency, and mutual effort. What you long for is not repetition, it is redemption. There is nothing wrong with that longing. But redemption requires more than the return of what left. It requires transformation in everyone involved. Otherwise, the same door opens into the same room. I don't think you've noticed this yet. Your prayer has changed. At first, you prayed, "Please let this work." Then, after enough confusion, your prayer became, "Please show me the truth." Those prayers may lead in different directions. The first asks for a desired outcome. The second asks to see without illusion. When truth begins arriving, it rarely feels as gentle as the answer you imagined. It shows you the pattern beneath the promises. It reveals how often you ignored your own discomfort. It lets you hear what someone consistently avoids saying. Then the heart protests because truth is closing a possibility it was not ready to bury. This is why you may feel divided. Your discernment is accepting something your attachment is still grieving. Attachment says, "But remember what we shared." Discernment says, "Remember what it required." Attachment points toward potential. Discernment looks at pattern. Attachment asks whether they could change. Discernment asks whether you can remain healthy while waiting to find out. Neither voice makes you foolish. One protects connection, the other protects integrity. The conflict begins when preserving a connection repeatedly requires you to abandon what you know. I see this in you. You have often treated self-abandonment as a spiritual virtue. You called it patience when you remained inside confusion without asking for clarity. You called it forgiveness when you restored access before trust had been rebuilt. You called it grace when you made excuses for behavior that continued to injure you. Patience, forgiveness, and grace are sacred qualities. But sacred qualities can be misused when they are separated from truth. Patience is not permission for another person to avoid responsibility indefinitely. Forgiveness is not an obligation to recreate the conditions in which you were harmed. Grace does not ask you to call a pattern accidental after it has become a choice. Even love has boundaries. A river without banks does not become more generous. It becomes a flood. Perhaps you were afraid that boundaries would make your heart less loving. You imagined that saying no would harden you, that distance would make you unforgiving, or that choosing yourself would mean you had stopped trusting God. But a boundary can be an act of stewardship. Your heart was given to you too. You are responsible not only for what you offer others, but for where you continue offering it. This does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means allowing character, not chemistry, words, or spiritual language, to determine who receives deeper access. Someone can speak about destiny and still behave inconsistently. Someone can say they prayed for you and still avoid the responsibility of caring for you. Someone can enter at a meaningful time without being meant to remain for every season. Timing may give a connection significance, but it does not automatically give it permanence. That is one of the hardest truths to accept. You thought that because someone's arrival answered an emotional need, they must be the answer itself. But perhaps they were a mirror. Perhaps they revealed what you desired, what remained unhealed, or what you could no longer pretend was enough. A mirror can change your life without becoming your home. The major shift begins when you stop asking only, "Why did this person enter my life?" and begin asking, "Who did I become while trying to keep them in it?" Did you become more peaceful or more watchful, more honest or more careful, more yourself or more acceptable? Did the connection expand your ability to live, or did it train you to monitor every sign of withdrawal? These questions do not deny love. They reveal its effect. And the effect matters because anything you call sacred should not require the repeated destruction of your inner safety. There was once a bell in a small hillside chapel that had not rung for decades. The villagers believed it was broken. Some said age had ruined it. Others said its silence was part of the chapel's mystery. One day, a craftswoman arrived to restore the building. She climbed into the tower and found that the bell was not cracked at all. The rope had been tied around the beam. Years earlier, someone had secured it before a violent storm and never returned to untie it. The bell had retained its voice the entire time. What looked like damage was restraint. When the craftswoman released the rope and pulled it, the sound traveled across the valley. People stopped in the fields because many of them had never heard it before. The bell did not need to be remade. It needed to be released from the thing that once protected it. Something similar may have happened inside you. At one point, becoming quiet protected you. It helped you survive environments where honesty created conflict. It prevented rejection when expressing your needs felt dangerous. It allowed you to remain connected to people who welcomed your support, but struggled with your truth. Silence served a purpose, but protection can outlive the danger that created it. You learned not to ask for too much, and now even healthy desire makes you feel guilty. You learned to hide disappointment, and now people assume very little affects you. You learned to read every room before speaking, and now you sometimes forget what you believed before everyone else's feelings entered the calculation. You have mistaken restraint for personality. You say, I'm just private. I don't need much. I'm better at listening. I can handle it. Perhaps those statements contain truth, but perhaps they also describe the rope around the bell. I think God put you on my heart because something in you is ready to recover its voice. Not a louder voice, a truer one. The voice that can say, I care about you, but this is not healthy for me. The voice that can say, I do not understand what God is doing, and I still refuse to live against what I know. The voice that can admit, I want love, I want companionship, I want to be chosen clearly. Pretending otherwise has not made me stronger. There is no shame in wanting to be loved. The wound begins when that desire persuades you to accept a version of love that requires constant self-doubt. You were never asking for too much by wanting consistency. You may simply have been asking someone who experienced your needs as an exposure of what they could not give. Their discomfort did not make your need unreasonable. It made the mismatch visible. This is the identity shift waiting inside your grief. You are not the person who was left behind. You are the person who finally began seeing what could not accompany you forward. Those identities feel different. The first keeps your attention fixed on rejection. The second returns your attention to direction. The first asks, why wasn't I chosen? The second asks, what was I being asked to sacrifice in order to remain? The first turns someone else's limitations into a verdict about your worth. The second understands that being wanted is not the same as being valued well. You have spent enough time measuring yourself by someone's ability to recognize you. Recognition is influenced by readiness. A person may encounter something precious while still being too distracted, frightened, or emotionally unprepared to hold it carefully. Their failure to receive it does not change what it was. But here is the truth that goes even deeper. You do not need to become precious through another person's recognition. You already possess worth before anyone chooses you, misses you, regrets losing you, or returns with an apology. If you require their return to prove that you mattered, you remain emotionally dependent on the person whose choices made you question it. Your healing cannot wait for their understanding. It begins with your own. I realized something recently. Sometimes the answer to why did God allow this is not found in what the experience gave you. Is found in what it could no longer convince you to accept. You can no longer call anxiety chemistry. You can no longer call occasional attention devotion. You can no longer use spiritual language to make inconsistency appear destined. You can no longer confuse the fear of losing someone with evidence that they belong in your life. The experience may not have given you the future you wanted. It gave you eyes you did not possess before. That is why returning to the old version of the story would cost more now. You would have to unsee the pattern. You would have to silence the discernment that grew through every difficult night. You would have to become the person who accepted fragments because she had not yet learned the difference between being contacted and being cared for. You are not that person anymore. You may still miss what happened, but you cannot unknow what it revealed. And perhaps that is why God's silence has felt so different lately. It may not be an empty silence. It may be the space in which you are finally allowed to hear your own restored voice. The bell was never broken. Neither were you. You were restrained by an old belief that love would leave if you became fully honest. Now you are beginning to understand that anything requiring your permanent silence has already left the deepest part of you alone. God did not put you on my heart today so I could tell you to keep waiting exactly as you have been. I think you came to mind because the waiting has already changed its purpose. You are no longer waiting for someone else to decide who you are. You are standing in the quiet moment before you begin living as though your worth has already been decided. Living as though your worth has already been decided changes the questions you ask. You stop asking, how can I make them see me? You begin asking, why did I stay where being seen required so much proof? You stop wondering how long you should tolerate uncertainty before it becomes love. You start noticing whether love is present in the way you are treated now. That change may sound simple, but it reaches into everything. It changes how you interpret silence, how you respond to inconsistency, how quickly you take responsibility for tension you did not create. It even changes the way you pray. For a long time, your prayers may have centered on changing the external situation. Make them understand, bring them back. Open this door. Show me the sign. Now another prayer is beginning to form. Help me remain honest, whatever the answer is. That prayer is transformation. It does not ask you to stop desiring a certain outcome. It asks that your desire no longer become stronger than your discernment. I need to tell you something. Peace will not always arrive as a feeling before you make a healthy choice. Sometimes peace appears afterward, when your nervous system finally realizes you are no longer going to keep placing it inside the same danger. The first honest choice may feel terrible. You may experience guilt after saying no. You may feel panic when you stop initiating contact. You may miss someone more intensely the moment you accept that you cannot continue as before. That emotional discomfort does not automatically mean you made the wrong decision. It may mean you interrupted a familiar pattern. Familiarity can feel like safety even when the pattern itself is painful. Your body knows how to survive the old cycle. Distance, anxiety, pursuit, temporary reassurance, relief, and distance again. When you refuse to repeat it, the silence that follows feels unfamiliar. There is no one to pursue, no message to analyze, no immediate relief to seek. You may call that emptiness, but perhaps it is unused space. Space is unsettling when chaos has occupied it for years. You do not yet know what peaceful attention feels like because so much of your emotional energy has been spent monitoring what might disappear. That energy will return slowly. At first, you may not know where to place it. You might reach for your phone without thinking. You may imagine conversations that will never occur. You may feel tempted to create a reason to reconnect, not because anything has changed, but because uncertainty feels easier than finality. Notice the impulse without obeying it immediately. An urge is not always guidance. Sometimes it is simply the old pattern asking to be fed. You do not need to fight it or shame yourself for feeling it. Let it pass through you. Ask what it is truly seeking. Is it seeking that person? Or reassurance? Is it seeking reconciliation? Or relief from the discomfort of separation? Is it love? Or proof that you still matter? Emotional clarity begins when you stop treating every longing as if it has only one meaning. You may discover that what you miss most is not the relationship itself. You miss feeling anticipated. You miss having someone to imagine a future with. You miss the brief moments when your guarded heart became soft. Those experiences are not permanently attached to one person. You can mourn where they happened without believing they can happen nowhere else. I don't think you've noticed this yet. The future you imagined was created partly by your own capacity for hope. You brought color to it. You imagined the conversations, the ordinary mornings, the sense of companionship, the safety of being known. Another person may have inspired that vision, but your heart supplied much of its detail. Losing them did not destroy your ability to imagine a meaningful future. It only made you afraid to imagine again. You will. But the next vision will be built differently, not entirely around chemistry or timing, not around words spoken during emotionally intense moments, not around the belief that difficulty proves something is destined. You will look for alignment between language and behavior. You will notice whether another person can remain present when the conversation is uncomfortable. You will pay attention to how they repair, not merely how beautifully they apologize. And most importantly, you will notice who you become around them. Do you feel free to speak? Can your joy exist without being reduced? Can your sadness appear without becoming an inconvenience? Does the connection allow your life to expand, or does it consume your attention until everything else fades? These questions do not remove mystery from love. They remove unnecessary confusion. Healthy love will still ask courage from you. You will still risk being known. You will occasionally misunderstand each other. No relationship can protect you from every fear. But you should not have to remain emotionally injured in order to remain emotionally connected. The difference will become visible because you are becoming visible to yourself. There is a story about a woman who restored old paintings. One day, she was given a portrait that had darkened so severely that almost nothing could be seen except the outline of a figure. The owner assumed the painter had used heavy shadows. He asked her to repair the cracks but preserve the gloomy character of the work. As she began cleaning, she discovered the darkness was not part of the original painting. It was smoke. The portrait had hung for decades in a house where fireplaces burned throughout every winter. Layer after layer had settled over the colors until everyone believed the darkness belonged to the artist's design. The restorer worked slowly. Beneath the soot, she found a blue dress, a window filled with morning light, and a small gold flower painted in the subject's hand. When the owner saw it, he said, "It looks like a different woman." The restorer answered, "No, it is the same woman without everything that settled on her. I see this in you. You have mistaken what settled on you for who you are. You thought you were naturally anxious, but part of that anxiety grew from unpredictable affection. You thought you were difficult to reassure, but perhaps you kept receiving words without evidence. You thought you expected too much, but your expectations had already been reduced repeatedly. You thought you had lost your faith because you asked difficult questions, when those questions may have been clearing borrowed beliefs away from something more honest. The darkness was real, but it was not your original design. Underneath it, something has remained untouched: your ability to recognize goodness, your instinct for sincerity, your desire to love without manipulating or controlling, your willingness to search for meaning even after disappointment. The soot did not become your identity simply because it remained for a long time, but removing it requires patience. Some days the old fears will return. A delayed response will still activate memories. A change in tone may make you wonder whether you have done something wrong. You may feel the urge to become agreeable before anyone has asked you to disappear. When that happens, do not tell yourself you have failed. Pause long enough to separate the present from the past. Ask, what is actually happening now? Not what happened before, not what you fear could happen now. That question returns you to reality, and reality is where discernment becomes possible. You may find that the present person is trustworthy, and the fear belongs to an older wound. In that case, honesty can create connection. You can say, "This brought something up in me," without accusing them of creating the entire history behind it. Or you may find that the current situation truly repeats the old pattern. In that case, your discomfort is not something to overcome so you can remain. It is information asking to be respected. Healing is not learning to ignore every alarm. It is learning which alarms belong to memory and which belong to the room you are standing in. That distinction will restore your self-trust, and self-trust will change your relationship with signs. You will no longer need every coincidence to predict the future. A song, a dream, or an unexpected memory can be meaningful without becoming a command. You can receive a moment of spiritual comfort without using it to override visible reality. God's guidance does not require you to deny the character, behavior, and wisdom He has already taught you to recognize. A sign that leads you back into confusion while asking you to ignore repeated harm may not be guidance. It may be longing searching the world for agreement. This is why the message that placed you on my heart cannot be reduced to, "Hold on, the person is returning." Maybe they will, maybe they will not. But your life is too sacred to suspend around a prediction no honest person can make for you. The message is more personal. You are returning. The part of you that went silent is finding language. The part that measured worth through other people's choices is releasing the scale. The part that feared God had forgotten you is beginning to see that even this difficult season has been uncovering your true face beneath everything that settled on it. You thought transformation would make you feel completely new. Instead, it may feel like recognition, a familiar laugh returning, a morning when your first thought is not the unanswered question, a decision made without mentally asking whether someone else would approve, a prayer that contains no performance, only your honest voice. These moments will seem ordinary. That is why you could miss them. But a life is not restored only through dramatic breakthroughs. It is restored when your attention slowly becomes available to the present again. You notice the sky rather than checking for a message. You enjoy a conversation without comparing it to someone absent. You make plans that do not depend on another person becoming ready. You begin inhabiting the days you once treated as a waiting room. That is where purpose returns. Purpose is not always a grand assignment. Sometimes it is simply the decision to become fully present in the life you have been given, to use your tenderness rather than hiding it, to create what disappointment taught you was missing, to offer others the kind of understanding you once needed without making their healing your responsibility, to allow joy without demanding that it justify the pain that came before it. You do not have to turn every wound into a mission. Some wounds are allowed to become scars and nothing more. They can remind you without defining you. I think you felt pressure to make your suffering worthwhile, as though pain must produce an extraordinary result before you are permitted to release it. But perhaps survival does not owe anyone a performance. Perhaps the meaning is quieter. You became more honest. You learned the difference between spiritual patience and emotional postponement. You discovered that being loving does not require you to remain available to everything. You learned that God can be present in a closed door without the door becoming less painful. And now you understand why your name came to me with such weight. It was not because you needed to be rescued by these words. It was because you were already beginning to rescue your own life from the belief that nothing could begin until uncertainty ended. Something has already begun. You are no longer asking only whether God will give you what you wanted. You are asking who you are becoming while trusting Him with what you cannot control. That question does not leave you powerless. It returns power to the choices that are still yours. You can choose honesty. You can choose rest. You can choose relationships where care does not have to be decoded. You can choose to let your prayers become a place of truth rather than negotiation. You can choose not to chase what requires you to forget yourself. And when you cannot yet choose peace emotionally, you can still choose not to act against it. That is how transformation becomes real. Not through a sudden absence of fear, but through a growing refusal to let fear design your life. You are still the same woman, but the smoke is lifting. The window is brighter. And for the first time in a long time, you're beginning to see that the person God has been restoring was not the one you lost. It was you. That was what I felt when your name came to me today. Not urgency, not a prediction, not a promise that everything you lost would return in the form you once wanted. I felt peace around the person you are becoming. For so long, you believed peace would arrive when all your questions were answered. You thought you needed to understand why someone changed, why a prayer unfolded differently, or why something that felt meaningful could not remain. But perhaps peace was never hidden inside the explanation. Perhaps it was waiting inside the moment you no longer needed the explanation to continue living. Acceptance does not mean telling yourself that the pain was good. It does not mean pretending you no longer care or calling every disappointment part of a perfect plan. Acceptance is quieter than that. It says, this happened. It changed me. I cannot rewrite it, but I no longer have to build my identity around it. You are allowed to remember without returning. You are allowed to love someone and still accept that loving them did not make the relationship safe, or allowed to believe that God was present without claiming you understand everything He permitted. Faith can hold mystery without turning it into fear. I need to tell you one final thing. You have spent enough time wondering whether you missed the sign. Maybe the sign was never a person arriving. Maybe it was the moment you finally recognized yourself beneath the waiting. Maybe it was your growing deep